You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 278 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. I'm joined today by Stuart Johnson, a sheep, beef, and arable farmer from Hexham in Northumberland, and Kyle Richardville, a consultant educator with consultancy Understanding Ag. And together they host the Grounded podcast, not the Louis Theroux one, the other one, which explores all things regenerative farming. So today I'm going to ask them more about what they do day to day. We'll talk a little bit about regen ag and the bigger picture around it. Guys, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. We've been trying to arrange this for quite a while, so it's good to finally have you on the show.
Thanks for
Thanks for
having
having
us.
us. That was awkward. Well then, that was a great start.
A slight pause. Are they there?
I was waiting for Kyle to lead there. Yeah, thanks for having us. No, it's been good. It's been a long time in the coming, but hopefully we'll be worth the wait. So
No, it's great to have you. Let's do that typical bit at the start of any show when just hear a little bit about each of you. Stuart, do you want to start? Just tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us about your farm.
yeah, so we are tenant farmers from the Northumberland Valley, near Hexham, the Tyne Valley. So we are mainly livestock farmers. That's our first and foremost. My particular interest is the cattle. Luckily, my brother likes sheep, so that sort of covers that box as well. So we've got a bit of both of them. We grow our own arable that we use on the farm. We used to grow, up to a couple of hundred acres of arable. We've pulled that right back now down to sort of 70 acres. Just managing to use the system that doesn't require as much of that and stuff like that. So, tenant farmers over 3 different parcels, roughly about 1,000 acres at the minute. Running about 180, 190 calving cows or calving
Okay.
cattle, shall we say, and then about 650, 700 sheep. So, yeah, we moved into a more sort of low input system over the last few years and try to sort of become more regenerative, as a good way of putting it. So we've tried to move our way of farming over the last sort of 12, 13, 14 years. So
Yeah, and we will definitely hear more about that as we go on. But Kyle, moving over to you, you're just down the road from me, down in Suffolk. But you're not originally from these parts, as your accent will give away. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I'm from the state of Indiana in the US. It's in the Midwest. I always say it's near Chicago. It's about a 6-hour drive, but you get the idea. Um,
Yeah.
I grew up on an arable farm there. My dad, my uncles, my cousins, we all farmed. It was your traditional corn, soya, wheat type commodity grain operation, but because we're so close to a major river, the soil's pretty sandy, so it's conducive to fruit and vegetable crops like watermelon. That was a big one for us. Broccoli, we actually grew about 1,000 acres of potatoes for what I call chips, crisps. And I always helped dad in the summer doing that. So yeah, I have that farming experience, but interestingly, my folks pushed me away from being a farmer. My dad always he said it's long hours, low pay, nothing but heartache, that kind of thing. Get a good job, you got potential. So went to university, wanted to be a medical doctor. I've always had this desire to help people meet their basic needs, and I thought I was going to do that through the medical field. But about halfway through, I realized two things. One, organic chemistry is a bear to try and pass in college, and two, I discovered the nutrition program, and I really learned just how important food and nutrition are to public health. And so I've decided to make the career change to work on public health and helping people meet their basic needs through food. And having that farm background, it was a natural fit. And so I ended up getting a graduate degree and doing research in soil microbial ecology. And I fell in love with the soil all over again. And so it kind of brought me full circle back to agriculture. And while there, I discovered a book called The Hidden Half of Nature by David Montgomery. It's a really, really good book. He's an American geologist, and he and his wife, Ann Clay, wrote this fantastic book talking about soil and soil microbes being the hidden half of nature. That bit of nature that's underground that we don't really see because we're above ground creatures naturally. So I learned about the term regenerative agriculture in that book. And being a fresh grad, I Googled, careers in regenerative agriculture, not wanting to work for, your typical big ag company, I suppose. And nothing against them, but I just wanted to work in this regen space. And I came across Understanding Ag and Gabe Brown, and I read Dirt to Soil, and through a long, convoluted 2 years, finally got the opportunity to work with them and move here to the UK to do some consulting and education with farmers. So it's been a long, winding road, but
Yeah.
I'm really blessed to be here and be able to work in such an awesome space that can have such a positive impact on, not just Americans or Brits, but everyone around the world.
Wow, what a fascinating journey. It's one of the things I love most about the people who listening to the people who come on this show. It is the routes they take, whether they're in farming or whether they're in a connected sort of role. Just going down a slight tangent, just simply because of your perspective. We are recording this the day after Inauguration Day over in the States. What's your take, but perhaps with an ag slant on it?
That's a tricky one, isn't it? Yeah, like I said, I come from a Midwestern state, and it's a very conservative Republican state, so my upbringing was very conservative, and so I'm well aware of the reasons why Trump was elected and the rhetoric that really hit home with people like from where I grew up. Speaking to my family, my dad and my brothers, they're worried that this big talk about tariffs is really going to interrupt their profitability. Is China going to stop buying our beans and our corn, that sort of thing. But other than that, I try to stay out of politics mostly, keep my nose to the grindstone and learn about soil and how to make farming better most of the time. So, and I understand that politics and economics have a huge part to play, in being profitable on a farm. But as a non-confrontational person, politics just turns me off most of the time.
Maybe you should go into politics the way you swerved that question there, Kyle.
That's just what
Maybe,
I was thinking.
maybe.
Did very well with that.
Mm.
Yeah, super
Um,
answer.
I should say, any US listeners, actually, US farmers, I would love to hear your perspectives. Please just, get in touch with us on socials or reach out on email, hello at ruralpodmedia.co.uk. The Trump story with ag, we will definitely be following through his term. So, and I'd love to get some more US farmers on to talk about your perspective. So we will be doing that. But that was an aside. We're going to be talking about regen today. Before we dive into that, though, Kyle, can you maybe just give us a little bit more on understanding ag in terms of what you do there?
Yeah, definitely. So, as I mentioned, Gabe Brown was one of the founders of Understanding Ag. I'm sure here in the United Kingdom, and I've met so many people that have read his book, Dirt to Soil. It's been such an important piece of literature, I suppose, in this region movement to really bring people in. If anybody doesn't know, it's about his story, his 4 years of crop failure due to hail and other environmental disasters, and how he discovered he needed to use nature rather than the inputs to be profitable, basically. And Dr. Alan Williams is another founder. He's my other boss at the moment. But there were a couple others, Ray, the soil guy, Archuleta, many people know of him, and then David Brandt from Ohio. They kind of got together and they were all individually doing these speaking tours, no tills on the plain, Acres Agroecology Conference in the US. Those are big one, groundswell type events. And they kind of all teamed up and said, we're really preaching, we're singing from the same hymn sheet here. Why don't we just team up and start some kind of consultancy and education group? And that's what they did, I think, around 2017 or so.
Okay.
And ever since then, we've just been, as a company, trying to spread the message of soil health and working with nature and not against it. So here in the UK, my role is to work with Regenerate Outcomes. It's a carbon baselining program. And when farmers sign up, they get our Understanding Ag services as well. So that's really what I do. Like I said, I'm blessed. I get to drive around all around the country, see agriculture in all the different regions of England, and hopefully we'll branch into Scotland and Wales here soon. Actually, we have branched into Wales. I've been to Pembrokeshire. That was beautiful. Very different from when I grew up. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed.
And I think Stu's been to Scotland as well, so he takes the northern region. But really, the cool thing for me has been growing up in North America. I've lived in various states, Indiana in the northwest, in the north, Texas in the south, North Carolina in the east, all different types of climate, humidity ranges, precipitation. And these soil health principles ring true everywhere. And so it makes my job a little bit easier, but our number one principle is context. So we try and understand everyone's context first and foremost, and then put into practice these soil health principles.
Stuart, let's go to you. Tell us a little bit more about your own regenerative journey, I suppose, actually, in terms of the shift that you took, that you are, I suppose, taking place on your farm.
So we were conventional, fully conventional, no real consideration or thought towards the soil. Kind of full stop, if I'm being brutally honest with you. Sort of 2010, 2011. We'd had a fully functioning business. We were quite, I wouldn't say resilient. We were still exposed to a lot of things, but we were quite a hearty business, if that makes sense. We were doing well. But as I'm a bit of a tight farmer, I'm still striving to cut costs all the time. Someone, I think it was the man who did our contract, and said to us one day, he did a contract drilling for us, and he said, I don't know why you bother plowing, because you could probably just drill into some of this, or min-till it at least, to save some money. So I latched onto that, thinking, well, we'll save a little bit of money, and persuaded someone to come from a long way away with a Claydon drill to drill straight in.
Okay.
So the contractor did himself out of the job, which he was obviously thrilled to bits with. And then we trialed a bit with this Claydon drill, and probably purely at the start, it was all arable stuff I was doing, just fiddling around with the arable side of things. My dad and brother are livestock through and through and don't like sitting in the tractor. So see, that was something I'd kind of picked up, just in terms of it was the operation that was free for all, if that makes sense. So I grabbed a hold of that and had a go at that. So all we were trying to do was cut inputs really, and then minimize our costs going into it with our tillage and stuff like that. We had a bit of success, a lot of failures, and a lot of that all sort of kept coming back to where we had like a high organic matter on a very, very loose basis, a high organic matter. We were able to get away with the reduced inputs and the reduced tillage and stuff like that. Where we didn't have the good organic matter, we had to rely on all those conventional inputs more to make it work. That was about 2016, 17. So 5 years or so of dabbling with it, experimenting, having some success, and we were going on well in some bits, and obviously some bits weren't. And it was kind of at that point we thought, well, look, we're going to have to either really jump into this or kind of pull back to where we were and just go safe. So I went on a bit of a educational thing, learning and reading as much as I could, watching all these YouTube videos of, well, Gabe and Alan. Eventually you stumble on them when you go through so many, you find them eventually. And then went on this sort of experimental journey. Learned you could do stuff with livestock that drastically reduced input. In fact, if I'm honest with you, the stuff we've done the livestock has far outweighed any of the benefits that we did with our arable tinkering, if that makes sense. So the benefits we've seen. So the livestock side of things was a real game changer when we started maneuvering those around and sort of building up soil fertility with livestock. We kind of used the herbal lays, joined the countryside stewardship around there, went into herbal lays, which are fantastic for building soil health pretty quickly if we need to, and if you manage them right. So we do that sort of a 5 and 2, I call it now, where we do 5 years of herbal lays and then pull it out and whack in a couple of years of arable. But that fertility building process that we've used for 5 years, or I like to call it the fertility bank account that we've built up, we can cash a little bit of that out with arable, which is what we do. So we took 2 years of arable in, but it's incredibly low input arable. So we're talking maybe a pre-emergence and then 40 units an acre of fertilizer at most, sort of thing. So we've reduced the inputs really high on that, which we take a bit of a yield penalty, but the margins a lot better, so that's fine. So we've moved down that sort of road. 17, 18, I think it was actually through this. I got an introduction to understanding ag through Regenerative Outcomes, who also is actually a guy I know who runs all that, and he said, you know, anyone who's farming that way, and I said, well, I am trying to farm that way. It's just quite complex, and there's lots of things going on, and I'm kind of drowning in science a little bit. And he said, so who are you following at the minute? And I said, oh, Gabe Brown and Alan Williams of Understanding Ag, and I think Shane was in there at the same time, and they were the ones I was listening to at that particular moment. And within a week, he had him on the phone, and we were chatting away on the thing, and it was an absolute game changer in terms of all of a sudden we didn't have to understand all that science that was kind of swamping me. The principle-led system was a lot easier to get on board with. So yeah, we made some substantial changes from then, and sort of really rallied and pushed on, and yeah, never really looked back since, to be quite honest with you, which has been fantastic. So
Should just
that's kind of sorry, gone.
No, that's fine. But while it's in my head, because just for listeners, we are sort of passing between understanding ag and regenerate outcomes. So I thought it might just be worth just clarifying the relationship between the two.
Okay, so yeah, so regenerate outcomes is, as Kyle said before, is a carbon-based program. So they basically use my farm as a bit of a pilot farm to trial and test methodology. So they are carbon auditors slash verifiers, and then they obviously want to monetize that carbon at some point. Yeah, they used my farm for years as just a bit of a pilot scheme to test all the methodology, and I got some super access to understanding ag. So part of their scheme is to be gold standard carbon, apparently, which is Verra accredited. So they went for the highest standard they could possibly get, which when they go for that, they also opted to provide an educational program within that, and that program's provided by Understanding Ag, which is obviously Kyle and the Americans who sort of facilitate most of that, which is where our relationship sort of built from. And then yeah, they run the podcast so that me and Kyle host for them, which is good because it gives us a chance to meet an awful lot of people and discuss an awful lot of topics with people. So so does that make sense? Have I explained that well enough to sort of clarify that?
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Yeah, Kyle, do you think there's anything else to add there? I think that was a good description.
Yeah, no, I think that was good. I just will say that Gabe and Alan and those guys, they get approached by carbon-based lending programs all the time. And the reason why they chose Regenerate Outcomes is because they are dedicated to education. Gabe always says farmers can't implement what they don't know. And this education piece is the most important piece of consultancy. I think that can be done out there. And Regenerate Outcomes is fully committed to getting farmers that education if they so desire. It's free for them. They get our consultancy services for free, no upfront cost. So that's the reason why they went with it, and the really good folks that really care about improving soil health and the environment. So yeah, it's been a pleasure to work with them.
If you don't mind, Ben, I'll just jump in that. One of the things I will say is that what I find is people kind of sometimes come into it for the carbon money, if that makes sense. But what I think is brilliant is that when you get talking to them and they realize they can make a more profitable, resilient business, the carbon kind of becomes the secondary factor to it, if that makes sense. Because once we start talking about, you know, how we can make margins, not just, you know, income, that's the bit that that sort of suddenly people realize that maybe the carbon doesn't actually matter as much to them. You know, that's sort of the cherry on the top as opposed to so that's the beauty of it, is that we can create a system that doesn't necessarily rely too much on inputs, which sort of reduces your exposure to uncontrollables, which is
Yeah.
a farmer. We all love to hear that, don't we? So it's a win-win sort of thing. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you look at your ledger sheet and you see how much you're spending on fertilizer, how much you're spending on diesel fuel, those input costs, if you can cut those by 10, 15%, that makes the carbon payment pale in comparison. I heard somebody say recently, they said, uh, the money you can make by switching your system will buy you a new truck. The money you can get from carbon will buy you new floor mats for that truck. So that's kind of a scale of the money that can be made. And that's what we're all about, is looking at your system from a holistic approach and seeing where we can make those changes. Oftentimes we start with the low-hanging fruit first. Every farm that we've come across has that low-hanging fruit where we can make changes immediately, and see some good financial return.
Hmm. I remember talking to a farmer at Groundswell last year who it gave me a phrase which has stuck with me, which was definitely see it to believe it. And he was describing how he was going through this process, and he was several years in at this point. But he said he was a real skeptic to start with, and as time has gone on, and it's been believe in the process, but actually it has been those cost savings, which has been the real thing that he wasn't actually. It's almost come as a byproduct of what he was expecting to go through on his journey.
I always say to people, the beauty of this whole thing is no matter what your actual motivation for doing it is. So for me, it was financial. I started financially. I don't make any bones about that. That's where it came from. I wanted to try and make bigger margins. So for me, it was financial. Now I know some people who go into this and they're super keen on, saving the planet, the environment,
Yep.
sequestering carbon, better water, drought resilience, if you will, or even if you've got heavy ground, it's the same principle-led system will get you to infiltrate water better and carry those wet spells better. So whatever the reason is that you do it, everything's coming with you anyway. So it's a bit of a win-win in terms of, the cleaner water, less fertilizer going into the drinking waters, into the rivers, into the environment, all that sort of stuff. So for me, financially, that was my target. But I'm bringing with it, more carbon sequestered into the soil, cleaner waters, less less reliance on uncontrollables and all that sort of stuff. So everything comes, and that's the absolute beauty of this for me is that no matter why or how it happens, and everything comes with it. So win, 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 win. Hopefully.
Tell us a little bit more about your podcast, Grounded, in terms of what it is and how it started. And like I said in the intro, this is not the one with Louis Theroux.
I'm going to lead because I got asked to do this podcast and they said, "Will you do the podcast?" And I thought they meant, "Will I go on the podcast?" So I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll come on the podcast." And then it suddenly transpired that it was me and Kyle running a podcast. So I was kind of tricked into it. And although I do have a face for radio, I'm not sure I've got the voice for it. So it's it's been an interesting sort of learning experience, but it's been thoroughly rewarding. Really enjoyed it. Kyle
I
probably
think
knows
just
a bit more.
just coming in, I think you have a great voice for podcasts. I think to us, anyone from the Northeast, I could listen to your voices all day long. So
Stu and I are not social media guys. We're not content creators. So this has been really a situation where we've been pushed out of our comfort zone, but it's been good. It's a lot like your podcast. We get to meet a lot of farmers. We've met people, not just farmers, but in various places along the food supply chain, and it's been really rewarding, getting to meet people, learn about their different perspectives. We met from one guy who had spent 25 years at Waitrose and learned about that side of the food system. And that's really important as well. So I've certainly learned a lot and grown out of my comfort zone. And unfortunately, or fortunately, we live in a world where content is king. So it seems like you meet people. It's rarer to meet someone who doesn't have a podcast nowadays than
it
does.
really is.
When I tell my friends I have a podcast, it's kind of cliche, but no, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, it's mad. Certainly, when I started podcasting in 2016, honestly, no one barely knew what a podcast was. But it's yeah, like you say, it seems like there's a different show that springs up every week now, which is, from my point of view, is actually a great thing. As long as if you've got an audience, no matter sort of how many people are in there, you're engaging with those people. I think it's a brilliant way of doing it. Hopping back to Regen Ag, I'm interested in your point of view of sort of misconceptions, I suppose, in terms of more of the reasons why farmers don't pursue a regen route. Because if you go into the sort of regen bubble, you sort of think sometimes, well, why isn't everyone doing this? So, what do you think of those things that hold people back, or the misconceptions that people might have about regen ag?
Man, that's a really good question. And I'm going to answer with a question of my own, Ben. What do you define regenerative agriculture as?
Hmm, that's a really good point. I think top of the pile would be sort of linked to soil disturbance, I suppose, in terms of practice. But I would also on the other side of things, I would put that it's a different mindset as well. So I think you're looking at the practicalities of the mode of farming, but you're also talking about the way of thinking as well. That's actually, I
Mm.
think that's something that I've increasingly learnt from regenerative farmers is that they see things in a different way, and that actually almost goes beyond their farm.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry not to throw you on the spot there, but
No, that's fine. I like it when that happens.
yeah. The thing with labels is they're positive and negative all at the same time. I think it's good to have a flag that you fly under. You have your group that you're with, but also that flag means different things to different people. And so to someone, regenerative agriculture might mean never using glyphosate. To some, it might mean never tilling. And so it does become a little difficult. So my personal definition is that regenerative agriculture, regenerate being a verb, I sat down and I really thought about what is being regenerated. And at the end of the day, it's the ecosystem processes that we manage. So at Understanding Ag, we haven't really touched on it, but we teach out of the 6-3-4 framework, the 6 principles of soil health, the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship drive those 4 ecosystem processes. And without going into too much detail, it's those 4 ecosystem processes that we're regenerating. So the, they're the energy cycle. So can we capture more solar energy and metaphorically recharge the soil battery, um, increase the size of the battery as well with practices that build organic matter and store that solar energy. Um, so the way you can think about it is, are you using modern sunlight or are you using ancient sunlight? If we can cut our diesel bill by using more modern sunlight, that's a win, financially speaking, and for the environment. The second ecosystem process is the water cycle. So can we infiltrate and hold more water for longer periods during the dry spells? Um, in Stu's case, those wet winters, can we hold our water in such a way that our cattle or our sheep can be on it and not mess up the whole paddock, muck it up? Um, Again, regenerating that, using more of that. Like where I'm from, we have these big, giant irrigation pivots, center pivots that cost a lot of money to run. If we can cut that use in half, let's say, that's a big win financially once again. So regenerating that cycle, regenerating the nutrient cycle. So reducing our fertilizer bill by having nature cycle more of those nutrients. Um, I was reading recently about phosphorus, and the scientists think that we're going to hit peak phosphorus production maybe in the 2030s, 2040s. So, if you're an older farmer relying on something like phosphorus, this is just a minor example, um, it's only going to get more expensive from here. So we need to rely more on the soil fungi specifically to get more phosphorus cycling into our system. So that's just a tiny example of one nutrient cycle. Every element cycles, and so if we can regenerate those cycles, we're really going to save a lot of money on fertilizer and use them more efficiently in the future. And lastly, the last ecosystem process that we're trying to regenerate is what we call community dynamics or diversity. So life. The more life we can get on our land and have it cycling and functioning, the more services we're going to get provided to us for free. So to me, that's what regenerative agriculture means. That's what I'm trying to do. And at the end of the day, my main priority as a consultant is to help my clients make more money, to be more profitable. There's the caveat there. Yes, I don't want to do that at the expense of nature, but with those 4 ecosystem processes I just outlined, the two go hand in hand. At the end of the day, those ecosystem services are driving farm profitability. It's just the past 100 years or so, we've had cheap fossil fuel. We've had really good systems in America and Britain where we have cheap fertilizer and cheap pesticides where we can bring in those external inputs and maybe wrangle the system in such a way that we can be profitable. But as everyone knows, those external inputs are getting more and more expensive. And like I said, something like fertilizer, specifically the ones mined out of rock, it's only going to get more expensive over time.
So, so Stuart, just bouncing that across to you, if we think of this question of why a farmer might not take the leap. Is it just following what from Kyle was talking about? Is it a question of stepping outside of the system, doing something that's different? Is it that, or is there something else going on?
I think there's a whole host of reasons why people are shy about coming out of out of the current system, if you know what I mean, in terms of the safety and what you know. Now you might not like it, you might not be making a huge amount of money in what you know, but you know it, and the
Yeah.
safety in that, and people can think, well, it's better the devil you know rather than jumping into something you don't. There's a whole rhetoric around this whole movement of you know, hippies dancing around fires with sandals on and all. And
Yeah, of course.
there's a whole and it's not like that at all. It's completely driven by I like to think by forward thinking, really driven individuals who are trying to make resilient businesses going forward. So I don't know 100% where that comes. Well, you can see where it comes from and some of the chats you have with people, and myself, I remember talking 5, 6 years ago about dung beetles to someone saying, all people talk about bloody dung beetles and this. I don't get it. Don't get it. Now, at the time, I probably didn't have enough experience as to why it was important. And people talk about the birds and the bees and the different uh, species of grass coming forward and all that sort of stuff. Now, a lot of those are just indicator species. So we use them as indicator species to look at them and say, look, this has come forward, which means brilliant, it's come forward. But it's also telling me what's going on in the soil. So cocksfoot, for example, will come forward when you have a slightly more fungal element in the soil, a bit more aeration. There's always seeds in the soil there, but it's not always there. It needs to repair that soil to a certain degree to allow certain plants to express themselves. So we can use lots of different observations as indicators. Now, for me, it keeps creeping back to what do those indicators means? Well, that means that we've got an ecosystem that is functioning by itself, which means I don't have to spend money on it. So I'm going to be less um, reliant on these expensive top-ups that we used to put on, shall we say? So um, you can see why people don't want to do it. I've had a huge, I'm going to say battle. It's not. It's been a lot of discussion, shall we say, at home here as to why we do stuff. Now, initially, no one else wanted to do this at home, and it was very much a right. If you want to do it, try it.
Okay.
Let's see little bits. Let's try it, and then as we get little wins, as it were, all of a sudden the discussions become a lot less tedious or a lot less argumentative. It's a lot more sort of, well, this is what I'm thinking about trying to do. What do you all think to that? And it was a lot more of a, well, that did work the last time, so we'll go with that. That's fine. And the wins bring more confidence in the whole system, and then it makes life a lot easier to sort of push the boat out even further, as it were. So we're sort of at a stage now where everyone's relatively comfortable that what I'm saying to them has got merit to it. So we don't have to have these battles anymore. It's very much a right, I'm going to do this, and everyone's sort of, yep, you crack on with that, and we'll all buy in. And it's, my dad put the electric fencer on a couple of years ago, got the reels all out, and came over and said, let's start moving some livestock. Now, I would never have thought I'd see him doing that 10 years ago, say. But to have him doing that a couple of years ago was the first one sort of saying, let's get going with it. He's suddenly seen the value in it. Now, my dad's very financially driven. So, again, it harps back to that. He's doing it for the financials, but also everything else is coming with it. So we're gonna see this sort of cyclically improving system just galvanizing itself faster and faster and faster the more we buy in. So we are sort of seeing that here at home. We've still got 190 head of cattle outside at the minute. Now, I'm sure people have got a lot of cattle outside everywhere in places, but we're doing it hopefully in a way that we don't have to reseed anything at the end of it. We're not putting silage out for them. We're doing it in a way that we're just deferred grazing, moving them around. Now, it is a bit of work moving electric fences. I think it costs probably about 50p a day with the cows outside. But when I bring them inside, it's going to cost me £2.50, £2.80 a day. So I'm clicking, 20% the cost every day on every cow. And for me, that's a huge win financially, but also I know that actually the kestrel comes up in the sky there and floats over the top of the cows every morning. Now, there's only going to happen if there's mice in there for them to eat, which means there must be a lot of seeds for the mice to eat, which means there's, a whole soil food web, as it were, that's working underground there that gives us those observational indicators, which is the kestrel flying in the sky. but we see that and it knows we've got a functioning ecosystem that allows that to be there. So it goes back to financials, but it's nice to see it as well. So I have grown to appreciate all that sort of stuff. I'm not a monster, as it were, but I have learned to appreciate all that sort of stuff that I never really had much consideration for to begin with. So it's a nice way of farming. It's a lot less stressful than worrying about the price of fertilizers and whatnot. So
Change is scary. Like I talk to my family about this a lot, and my dad says, look, our system is built for our individual farming system is built within this larger American farming system. Like I believe that most farmers have been pushed into this direction, and they have thousands to millions of dollars and pounds built in infrastructure for a certain type of system. So to change that is scary, and it takes a lot of effort, and it can't happen overnight like some people think it can. So it's yeah, all about that incremental shift and changing, and like you said, change in thought. Gabe, another important quote that Gabe says is, if you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. If you want to make big changes, change the way you see things. So you're right. This regenerative movement is mindset as well.
Yeah.
I've lost
So,
track of the number of farmers who've said to us, well, we've just invested so many million in a new parlor and a new system and all this. We need to pay the bills to get that paid off. So they would like to make changes, but they're so heavily invested in the current system that actually to risk that, even though they're not making a huge amount of money, to risk that by changing the methods is so incomprehensible at the minute. But they like the idea of it. They just can't. A lot of them can't bring themselves to think, well, we've just put 5 million into a new parlor. Are we then going to go back down to milking once a day or something like that? Or, some sort of changes that then make what they've done invalidates it slightly. So it's an interesting discussions we have with people a lot of the
yeah.
time.
Yeah, I think two things come to mind on that. The first is, which runs on from what you've been saying, what is your idea of progress? And again, if you're seeing things over the long term, which we do in farming, you're generally investing for the long term. I think that's a fantastic point that actually, if you're then going to make a change that then not only changes what you see on the ground, but it also changes that whole route that you've been taking for that whole time. It depends on how you see that. And the second thing is that theory of marginal gains, isn't it? Which comes up again and again with so many guests on this podcast. Small steps add up. Take one small step today, and over time, that will change. Stuart, I'm really interested in how other farmers, perhaps in your area, say, or further afield, have responded to what you've been doing on the farm and your own changes.
Yeah, we've got like a little clique of us now up here who have a little WhatsApp group, and the team. It's been changed to a rude name now, so I'll not say it. It's one of our wives calls us the. Are we allowed to swear on here? Is
Yeah,
that
you can.
inappropriate?
You can.
So one of our wives has been referring to us as the soil wankers for quite some time now, and the WhatsApp group has now been changed to the soil wankers. So there's sort of 10 or 12 of us, and we exchange ideas, talks, and we go to events together and stuff like that. And it's sort of building that little niche, the little click in here that's good because I'm not going to lie to you, when I was sort of trying stuff 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, and there's no one doing it, it's a quite lonely place because you kind of pushing away, pushing not you're pushing against the system a little bit in terms of what they're trying to make you do in the system, and we're trying to say, well, actually, I don't necessarily want to do that. I want to try this, but I don't necessarily know how to make it work. So it can be quite a difficult sort of discussion to have. But yeah, there's loads of people. So we have farm walks quite regularly, and there's sometimes 2 people turn up, and sometimes there's 50 people turn up. So there's plenty of interest in it. We have I've got friends who sort of come to the farm and talk about it and look at it and can't quite bring themselves to pull the trigger on it, if that makes sense. But then I've also got a good friend of mine who came to the farm and on his way home bought some electric fences and went home and set them up and started
Wow.
shifting. And you see the difference in mentalities there of people who want to think about it and they learn it and understand it. And then there's the doers who would like, I'm going to do it and I'm going to understand how to do it as I go. And without sort of trying to push people that way, you will never understand something as well as you will by doing it. So you need to go in, you need to make your own mistakes, you need to hopefully, have someone telling you some obvious mistakes that you can avoid because that's actually big help. But if you can just get out there and do something, try something, it makes life so much easier. So yeah, we've got a great little click up here now. It's nice, and we've got lots of farmers who are sort of buying in more. We've got a few people who are kind of what I've always classed as conventional, not conventional, so performance grazing type, 21-day rotations, really
Yeah.
fast rotations. And they're sort of a few of them are starting to see the benefits of a tall grass graze, and the different sort of wins that we can get with that. So we have got a few guys who have sort of always been the 21-day really high performance grazing are starting to shift as well, which is brilliant to see. And now I'm not saying that people have to, I guess this is the whole thing with, we call AMP grazing, adaptive multi-paddock grazing. So what I never appreciated was that, some people say, oh, you graze 50%, leave 50%. Some people say you graze a third, trample a third, leave a third. Some people graze on a 21-day rotation on leafy stuff. Some people set stock. Some people are one graze a year, taking the top off. There's loads of different ways of grazing. And I think that what I probably didn't appreciate enough was that we're going to try and employ all of that, and we're going to use all of them because the system needs to be tested and prodded and pushed.
Okay.
Because it's much like us when we go to the gym. If we go to the gym and work out, we come back a bit stronger, hopefully. The soil's exactly the same, it's made up of biology the same way that we are. If we sort of push that system with different methods of grazing, we can make that system really quite resilient and strong. And grow an awful lot more grass off the back of it as well, which is what we're ultimately trying to do. So it's interesting that, I think Alan Williams put it really well, and he said, no matter what system you use, you could have the leave a third, graze a third, trample a third system, which is fundamentally quite a strong starting point. But eventually that system will plateau at some point because we haven't tested it and pushed it. So no matter what we do, we're gonna keep mixing it up and changing it and prodding it and changing the, field by field, livestock class by livestock class. We're going to change up how we graze all the time and make sure that we are continually testing that system to make it stronger. And I think that's the beauty of this AMP grazing is that it's not, and this goes back a bit more to your point before, why don't people change? There is no magic blueprint that tells you exactly what to do day by day. It's all about observational skills and learning to observe better and then make decisions based off what we've learned. So we go in and we'll observe, what sort of livestock class is it? What are they eating? What are they going for first? We can tell what minerals they might be short of by, not minerals, but in terms of are they wanting a higher protein diet? Are they going straight in and eating the clovers? Are they sort of going for the grasses first? Are they eating the seeds? And then we can look at the livestock themselves. Are they happy? Are they straight head down and eating, which means they've probably not given them enough for the day before. But if they go straight to the end of the paddock and run along there, that means they've probably had enough the day before. They like to explore. They like to see exactly what they've got, and then they'll start grazing. So there's loads of observations that we can learn on the way that actually help us make really solid decisions in what we do the next day and the next day and the next day. So the blueprint is not 50%, 50%, leave a third. It's not, there's no rotation or system. It's very adaptive. And that's what is essentially the beauty of the whole thing and gives it its strength. So
So much food for thought for listeners there. Lots to reflect on. Time is against us. We could keep talking about this all day, and I know I could keep listening to you on this all day, but we are going to have to start to round this up. We always finish the show with the same two questions, one of which is a message for the public, and one of which is a message for farmers. Kyle, I wondered if you could give us a message for the public, and then Stuart, I'll go over to you for the other
Sure. I think for your listening audience, I would say think about Wendell Berry's quote where he says, "Eating is an agricultural act." So for any of you that aren't necessarily directly involved in the food supply chain in agriculture, we're all eaters. We all eat 2, 3 times a day, and that means we are all a part of this agricultural food chain, this food supply chain. So begin to think about where your food comes from. Think about who you're supporting as best you can. Now, I understand um, regenerative or organic, it comes with a price premium, and not everyone is lucky enough to be able to afford it. But if you can, just consider looking out in the supermarket for those types of products and vote with your dollar, as they say, because it's going to take a bottom up from movement from the consumer to really move the needle on this and get food produced the way we all want it to be produced, which is in a way that's farm profitable for the farmer, but also good for the environment.
Great. I love that quote as well. Stuart, a message for farmers.
I think at the minute farmers have been a bit of a punching bag for quite a few months, years now, in terms of we've sort of taken a bit of a beating, and I think that there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of excitement for the future, or certainly as here with me and in my sort of general sphere is that yeah, times are tough and we're gonna have to navigate through this sort of period of uncertainty as we sort of wait to see what sort of sucker punch they'll pull on us next. But I think that, given the prices of food is increasing or the prices that we're getting at the markets are increasing for livestock especially, there is potentials for profits to be made there if we can get a hold of our input costs and make sure we've got those under control. So for me, really, farmers just let's sort of take the bull by the horns a bit and say, look, we can't control all of these prices, the input prices, all that sort of stuff, but we can control how much of them we need to use or how much of it that impacts on our business. So if we can just withdraw ourselves from the reliance on a lot of those input costs and make sure that if we can, even if we lose a bit of output cost in terms of the value of per animal, say, because you might sort of go for a slightly easier fattening animal or something like that, we can hopefully increase the margin on that by not having to worry about the inputs so much. So if we can just sort of really hone in, focus on our business and get a hold of those uncontrollables, there's a huge opportunities and potentials going forward if we can make that work. So stay positive.
Good line to end it on, I think. We'll leave it there. But massive thank you, guys. Huge thanks to Kyle Richardville and Stuart Johnson for coming on the show. Cheers, guys.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Ben.
Ben.
That is it for today. Join me next time. Next week, we will be on the Isle of Man, and I'll be speaking with dairy farmer David Cool. We'll also be having a cheese tasting during that episode of Isle of Man cheese, Manx cheese, which I'm very much looking forward to. But for now, I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers, and thank you very much for listening. Meet the Farmers is brought to you by RuralPod Media, the only podcast production agency to specialise in the rural sector. We're on a mission to make rural stories mainstream and help businesses, organisations, and communities like you tell your story through podcasting. Podcasting is a fantastic way of connecting with your audience, whoever that might be, getting your message out there and networking with leaders in your niche. RuralPod Media can help you by launching your new podcast or helping you with the technical side. We also provide podcast training and an audit service if you already have a podcast, you're not sure where to take it to next. For more information or to book a call, visit ruralpodmedia.co.uk. That's ruralpodmedia.co.uk.